Hello and welcome to the Popcorn Junkies. We are reviewing There's No Place Like Home. Well, there is, actually. Twisters. What's the connection? Judy Garland, Wizard of Oz, tornadoes. I think the first time I ever saw a tornado was in The Wizard of Oz when it lifted a house and it landed it on top of the Wicked Witch of the Southwest. Anyway, tornadoes. Years ago, I made a film with Nat Geo called The Tornado Hunters, or set in Tornado Alley. We went charging along back in the day when they had just little kind of, not VHS cameras, but almost kind of SVHS cameras, tiny little kind of mini DV and all that kind of stuff. And you get loads of kind of guys and girls kind of running around in cars, literally chasing them, but just filming them very much from afar. They never really got close to them. So tornado hunting, tornado wrangling, as they call it in this film, is quite a thing. It's quite a thing. And of course, this Twisters, it comes from Amblin, which is the production company run by Steven Spielberg. They did the original film, Twister, back in 1996. Feels like it was a film of the 80s, but it really was a film of the mid-90s. But Twister, the original, was very much from that sort of Spielbergian stable, where you knew you were getting something a little bit richer and a little bit sort of different. It's a kind of natural disaster film, and we don't get many of those. I'm trying to think of some of the more recent ones that we've... San Andreas, that was one, starring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I have some, just before we get into this film, one of the issues I think I have with natural disaster or naturally occurring disaster movies, like, you know, things that involve floods, tsunamis, wind, cold, I'm trying to think, earthquakes, buildings falling down, all that kind of stuff, you know, boats sinking, all that kind of stuff. Titanic's a good example. There's only a limit to what can happen. Do you know what I mean? It can't go beyond the admittedly extraordinary in terms of the natural world, but it can't go much further. So what you have to kind of pivot towards is not the shock and awe, which I think the first, you know, whenever you make your first film about tornadoes, it's the shock and awe. So the first film, Twister, wow, these are fucking tornadoes. This is amazing. And we're watching a film about people really going into tornadoes and all that. Wow. But now it's like, tornadoes, we get them in Lincolnshire, for God's sake. In fact, I think there was a Twister in Thornton Heath. In fact, there might have been a Twister between West Norwood and Streatham Hill. Possibly the funniest line in the film. So, of course, this stars Daisy Edgar-Jones, she of Normal People, the series in which she was starring alongside Paul Mescal. He's gone to Gladiators. She's become a Twister wrangler. And it also stars Glen Powell. Glen Powell, probably most notable at the moment for the romantic comedy Anyone But You. Quite sort of, you know, classic quintessential American cowboy-esque kind of character, Glen Powell. He's got that sort of swagger and he's got that sort of cowboy chaps kind of thing. And Daisy Edgar-Jones, she was also in a film called Fresh, which I think is a really interesting film, actually. Daisy Edgar-Jones as Sebastian Stan, if you haven't seen it. I thought she was great in that. She was also in When the Crawdaddy Sings. It was awful. She wasn't awful, but it was awful. I mean, I hated that film. It was so bad. It was so trite and twee and just bad. Also in this film is Anthony Ramos. You may know him from, he had a small part in A Star Is Born, but he was also in the Heights, which I have to confess I didn't see, not an enormous fan. And he's been in some, if not a few of, I think, the Transformer films. Again, I've seen him pass by on the sides of buses often, but I've not really watched anything with him in. So what is this about? Any guesses? It's about tornadoes. And really, the film, it's a pretty straightforward narrative, and the trailers tell us everything we need to know. What we have here is tornadoes, chase them, essentially two competing squads. You've got the squad with Glen Powell at the helm, who's a kind of YouTuber, a tornado wrangler. He's the cowboy. He's the kind of the hustler, the rustler, the dude. And he has like a really cool kind of truck that he drives around, and they fire rockets out of it from the side. They've got drills that drill it into the ground so that when they're at the epicenter of a tornado, it stays grounded. Quite liked all that sort of stuff. I'll tell you something though, right at the beginning. I really like the way this film is shot and edited. They've put some effort into kind of creating a colour palette that I think is quite neat. It's quite classy. It's nicely covered. You know, you're not dealing with scenes where there's kind of like just one wide take of a situation. They've got a lot of cut-ins, a lot of kind of breakdowns and close-ups and medium close-ups of lots of different bits of kit and stuff like that. So at times, this feels like you are watching something like, I don't know, Ghostbusters Afterlife or something like that. So they've gone to great effort with the kind of the sequencing and the covering of scenes and some of the kind of action sequences. And so what you have is you've got Daisy Edgar-Jones. It starts off with her and her buddies. They're all kind of young, idealist tornado hunters. But at the epicenter, or at the heart of their sort of tornado hunting, isn't just the thrill, though they're all thrill seekers. Everyone in this film is a thrill seeker, but their thrill seeking is baked into their thrill seeking is the idea that they've got this technique, this scientific kind of meteorological technique of being able to open barrels full of a certain type of kind of chemical that if you open them at the epicenter of a tornado, it's a little bit like Ghostbusters again, isn't it? Putting down the track for the ghosts to come in. The tornado will suck this stuff up, and when it sucks, what is it? Sodium polyacrylate solution. When it sucks the sodium polyacrylate solution up, it will diminish the ferocity of the tornado. Now, what's interesting about this is I've said this many times before for anyone who knows that channel and has listened to me bore them senseless about this like an old man. But I've flown through Hurricane Floyd. I've flown with the hurricane hunters, and they do exactly that. They go through the eye wall of the hurricane. They get to the eye of the storm, and then they would drop these things, dropsons, out of the plane to measure the size, the evolving and developing size of the hurricane, so they could radio the information back down to Earth, down to the crews on the ground, say, oh, it's getting stronger, or oh, it's all right, calm down, it's kind of diminishing. This is like that, but rather than just measuring it, which they're doing, they're also trying to fire this sodium polyacrylate solution up there so that it actually diminishes it. So what's quite nice about this film is, yes, there's the thrill, yes, there's the buzz, and there's the hit and the addiction, and you've very much got with Glen Powell's team of kind of, almost hillbillies as they're, jacking around, racing around, flying drones and all their bits of kit, and they're all yee-haw and they're constantly live streaming on their every bit of fucking, tablet and kit and all this kind of stuff. Even they, in their hearts, are doing this, though they're the thrill seekers we discover across the film, that they're actually doing it to raise money to help the communities that get blighted by these tornadoes when they hit. Which conversely, what we discover is the team that Daisy Edgar-Jones ends up with, because what happens in the prelude of the film is, with her young buddies, she gets traumatized because in their hunt and in their chase of tornadoes, she loses her boyfriend. It's quite dramatic, actually. The opening scene, I was surprised the body count is high quite quickly in this film. And that's something you don't often see. I mean, you're thinking, oh my God, no, they won't blow up. Oh, he's blown off. I mean, as in taken away, not that he gets blown off. You know what I mean? He blows off. And then someone you think, no one else will go. My God, they're blown. So people die. And so within the first 10 to 15 minutes, you're already sat there with a traumatized Daisy Edgar-Jones. 5 years later, she's moved on. But then, of course, as is the way with these films, Anthony Ramos's character decides to get in touch with her because he needs some help tracking tornadoes, monitoring them, and working out how to measure them and all this kind of malarkey. So he convinces her to come out of retirement at the age of 23. And so she goes, if there was one part of the film I wasn't convinced by, was the extent to which she was so traumatized. She loses her boyfriend, she loses her friends, she loses her entire community, her peer group, because of her plan and her idea. And then she kind of goes, oh yeah, all right, okay, let's get back on the road. And so what you have is essentially 2 hours of her rejoining Anthony Ramos, them heading off. But Anthony Ramos, her old buddy, who's the only other survivor from back then, his company, which is called Storm Par, what we discover is, they're not a particularly nice outfit, actually. What's going on there is, yes, they're measuring them, yes, they're trying to work out the damage, but the investor of Anthony Ramos's organisation that he's working for, that's managed to convince Daisy Edgar-Jones to come back out of retirement and go riding and tornado wrangling, basically what they're doing is they are scoping out the damage that these tornadoes will do to land, to communities, to farmsteads and all this kind of stuff. And then the investor in the company is working out what money he can offer the victims, if you like, the people, the families, the communities, and the livelihoods that are destroyed by these tornadoes. So baked into Anthony Ramos's kind of team, and Daisy Edgar-Jones's team, that by association she's kind of come back into tornado wrangling with, they're kind of like the sheriff in Jaws. That's what I quite liked about them. That's nasty kind of Machiavellian kind of, so they're not really helping anyone. They're just kind of exploiting the kind of bits that are left over, and they're sort of taking advantage of the trauma and the loss of life and the loss of kind of land that these tornadoes incur. What they discover, though, what she discovers across the film, and really, Daisy Edgar-Jones and Glen Powell, this is a very slowly twirling. They dance around each other like a pair of twin tornadoes. There's one moment in this where you've got twin tornadoes. It's like one tornado, we saw it in the trailer. One tornado is not enough, we've got two tornadoes. And at another point in this film, you've not only got twin tornadoes, you've got twin tornadoes, and then you've got tornadoes that have intercepted a gas plant. So you've got fiery tornadoes. Wow! So they do. This film really does do as much as it can do with tornadoes. As you can't make. Can you make a tornado any bigger, any more ferocious? I don't know. So at the end of the day, this whole film is the two tornadoes. If you like, the two character tornadoes of Daisy Edgar-Jones, which is a more gentle one, and Glen Powell, which is a much more kind of energetic one. They're sort of moving around each other, and they're getting closer, and then they move away, and then they're getting closer. But what she discovers is Glen Powell and all the cowboy-esque kind of group and crew that he's got. They're actually raising money through all of their live feeds and all of their kind of hullabaloo. And they're using that money and they're raising that money to help the communities that get blighted by these tornadoes. So there's a nice there are two things within this. There's an acknowledgement of ecological disaster, climate change, the severity of the tornadoes becoming larger and larger and worse and worse. And then you've also got the idea that what comes with climate change is a deprivation of quality of life. It destroys the livelihoods of the disenfranchised already, the poor people, ordinary people. So it doesn't go on about that, but that's happening. And it's quite nice that it kind of embraces that and acknowledges that. Does it work as a film, though? Does it work? I have to say, I went into this thinking this ain't going to do it for me. But I got quite won over by it. And I think the reason I kind of got won over by it was in the manner that I said at the beginning of this review. I think they took real effort with some of those kind of live action real scenes. Obviously, there's a lot of CGI. There's a lot of special effects. You could argue that because the tornadoes have to become so big and so destructive, and so they eat through things like this gas plant and there's fire everywhere and all this kind of stuff, that they become almost intangible. I mean, there's one moment where one of the cars kind of drills into the ground and then the tornado rattles around the car. But they've become so big, you almost, not that you want to get close to any tornado, however big or small it is, but there was a bit of a disconnect between what was going on over there, clearly in CGI land on the big sort of horizon, and what was going on in the cars. And a lot of the film sort of happens from the point of view of a car, because that's like your boat, isn't it? I mean, the analogy is if you're on a boat and that's Jaws, well, that's a tornado and this is our car and we're driving around and all that kind of stuff. Some nice touches in with Glen Powell and his team. They've got a British journalist who's taking photographs, and he delivers a cracking line at one point. I think he's a kind of actor from things like The Crown and Downton Abbey and stuff like that. And he delivers the line that he's from a place in London. He lives in London between West Nord and Streatham Hill. That's us to hear West Nord and Streatham Hill, and it gives you one of the most comedic sort of pauses in the film where they all go, "All right, West Nord, Streatham Hill, fair dues." Nice little touch there. Now, let's talk about the characters. I thought Daisy Edgar-Jones was good. There were a couple of kind of junction points where she had to leap a little bit unbelievably from, say, trauma and grief, even 5 years after the trauma that she'd gone through, to then suddenly being back on the road again. That was a bit clunky. And then there was another moment where, okay, so she's kind of begrudgingly on the road. She has a kind of anxiety moment. She can't really do it. She makes a few mistakes. She leads them up the wrong way because she's kind of, she's worried. She's lost her skill, her tornado wrangling skill and all this. And then there was another turning point, which I didn't really buy into, which is where she sort of went from being quite serious and quite sullen and solemn and quite sort of small and interior to suddenly being quite sort of japesy and kind of flirty with Glen Powell's character. But that said, I liked the chemistry between Daisy Edgar-Jones and Glen Powell. I have to say, I was quite charmed by Glen Powell. I don't know what it is he's got. I mean, obviously he's conventionally good looking, but there's nothing about him that's kind of, wow, he's good looking. But there's a certain kind of kick and class. I mean, he made me want to buy a Stetson, for example. And he managed to have a nice amount of kind of cheeky glint, a little bit of kind of, impish charm. I mean, I was sitting here watching it thinking, could you be in with a shot with Indiana Jones, say? Or could you be in with a shot in something like the new Jurassic Park films? He's got that thing. He's got a little bit of something that Chris Pratt had, which Chris Pratt has lost because he's kind of become a bit too aware of the fact that he's Chris Pratt. So I quite like Glen Powell. I thought Anthony Ramos was very good as the friend. All the supporting cast right at the beginning of the film I thought were brilliant, who played all of her friends and what have you. And of course, the way the film moves along, they go back and they have to try and, so she resurrects her original plan of launching sodium polyacrylate into the kind of ether. She takes Glen Powell back to her home. He goes into her barn and sees all the stuff that she was planning back then. We have little flashbacks to when she was with her previous boyfriend and all that kind of stuff. So what am I trying to say? I think I was kind of marginally surprised by this. I thought it was entertaining enough. I thought it's interesting. I've seen since that one of the kind of buzz lines is it'll make you nostalgic like Top Gun Maverick. And do you know what? That's not a bad grab, because I was getting something similar. I mean, Twister, the first film, I saw it and I think I liked it, but I was probably a bit kind of like, oh, well, I filmed with these real guys, and yeah, it's all right. It wasn't one of those films that defined a moment for me. I think in 26, I was busy fucking up my life, to be honest with you. I wasn't watching films like Twister. But I did get some kind of nostalgia for something, and I think what I got was a nostalgia for a Spielbergian entertainment. And I think the director, Lee Isaac Chung, did a really good job with this, of delivering us some of that. I do think it suffered from a lack of, I mean, the cars were real, the tech and kit and all that kind of stuff was real. I liked all of that, and it very much became tornado hunt, get kit, miss it, get caught in it, oh, failed, go back to base, have a little bit of kind of emotional stuff and a little bit of relationship stuff, and then go back into the and then back out. So it's a very obvious sort of, you know, peaks and troughs of drama. I think it could have afforded to be 15 minutes shorter. In the last 5 to 10 minutes, and the way the end films, I think, the way the film ends, I think I really liked, is with this sort of inferred but not confirmed romantic kind of connection between Glen Powell and Daisy Edgar-Jones. And this moment at the airport where she's heading off, there's bad weather, he doesn't know whether to go, he doesn't want to go. There was a nice kind of, what they hinted at the end there was a bit of screwball comedy that I think they could have done almost retrospectively with dribbling a little bit further back into the film. It came alive. I thought the two of them together were really nice. I liked watching them both on screen. It wasn't soppy. And it kept moving along. And I think it's a weird thing to say this, but I think some of them, the sort of real action happening with real bits of kit and things rather than all CGI, those scenes were very well covered. They were very well production designed. The actors, you know, we had a real sense of believability. It was very earthy. You know, when you've got films where you've got a lot of wind and you've got a lot of kind of stuff blowing around, it's like the opening of Close Encounters. You want to believe that, or Dune, you want to believe that you've got almost sand in your mouth, or that in any minute in the cinema you could be hit in the head with a bit of debris. I got that. I believe that. It was good. One moment that didn't work was when Glen Powell got his leg trapped under something, and then they all started to try and lift it, and then Anthony Ramos came along with a bit of wood to kind of like lever it, and that just didn't work at all. I mean, that one bit of wood wouldn't have lifted this whole thing. And then there was a weirdly sort of poetic moment at the end where the kind of final denouement of this ultimate tornado, where essentially Daisy Edgar-Jones does her end of Jaws moment, where rather than shoving the kind of, you know, the air canister in its mouth and then blowing it, shooting it and blowing its head off, she drives off into the distance to the epicenter of the tornado and fires her sodium polyacrylate up into it to kind of diminish it. This all happens out of the back of a destroyed cinema, which is showing Frankenstein. And there was some kind of, I wondered what was the metaphor here? What was this film trying to tell us? Was there some statement about the fate of cinema? Because let's face it, this is the sort of one of, if not the tentpole action thriller, natural disaster films of the summer. This is meant to be a big summer blockbuster. And here was a cinema being destroyed by the very CGI that we were being asked to go and watch. And as I turned around to look at the cinema chairs and the rest of the screen that I was in, I was the only one watching it, and I couldn't help but feel baked into the end of this film is a strong message or metaphor really about the end of cinema, which is a bit depressing really, because the cinema goes up, the cinema's destroyed. I mean, almost one of the most unbelievable parts of this film was how full the cinema was as the tornado destroyed everything. And the fact that people were still insisting on sitting in their seats to watch this old film whilst the wall against which the screen was against had been ripped away. So it was quite poetic. But in a weird way, all it kind of served to remind us was that really cinema dying. I'm slightly worried it could be. So what would I give this as a score? I would say I was pleasantly surprised. So I would give this, bearing in mind that this is my surprise score, so I would have given it much lower than this. I'd give this 63 out of 100.